Alright guys, so we have spent the last couple of weeks talking about adding and subtracting integers. But what I want to talk to you about today is we're going to start on multiplication of integers. So before we get started though, I do want to talk a little bit about this word right here. Multiplication. I want to talk to you about the concept of multiplication. All right, basically what does it mean? Well, first of all, talking about addition, right? And just a little side note here, if you're talking about addition, when we were doing our integer tiles, okay, or integer counters, remember if we had something like 4 plus negative 2, we said, okay, well there were 4 positives and we're adding on 2 negatives. Remember how we talked about addition is putting more in this area, so that of course is 2 negatives, so we'd put more down. Okay, of course that would be a positive 2 left over, but the whole point is that addition is just putting more on or putting more in, depending on what you're talking about. Okay, the word subtraction, of course, is, you know, let's keep it basic. If you have 4 fingers up, all right, and you're taking away 2 of them, that's exactly what you're doing, is you're taking them away or taking them off or taking them out, depending on what you're talking about. So that's what subtraction is, okay? But what happens is with multiplication, I think what happens is it's a little harder concept to understand when you're in elementary school. So when you're in 3rd or 4th grade and you're talking about multiplication, or your teacher's discussing it with you, okay, they may be teaching you the concept, but maybe it's just at your age it's a little hard to wrap your mind around. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what multiplication actually is. Okay, well, multiplication, and some of you may be thinking, well, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to know what multiplication is? Well, here's why. Because if you understand what multiplication, the whole concept of it, you should be able to identify it better in word problems. And believe me, in this upcoming chapter test, you're going to have word problems. And so you're going to want to know by reading it that you're supposed to multiply. So it's just a reading comprehension skill is really what it is. Okay, so with multiplication, let's talk about, I want to talk about the different components of multiplication. Okay, first of all, one component is that what it's doing is it's basically going to give you a number of what I'll call groups. Okay, a number of groups, and the second part is the second thing is they're going to give you basically the size of the group. The size, we'll call it the size. This could be basically how many are in each group. Okay, so the number of or the size of each group. Okay, now a little reminder is where multiplication works, they have to be the equal amount in each group. Okay, and then what you're going to have is the very last part is it's going to ask you, what's the total amount? What's the total amount? Okay, so you may be looking at that and saying, okay, that makes no sense. All right, well, let me describe it a different way. Okay, actually I'll describe it the same way but give you an example. All right, so let's say we were playing a game in here and I handed out hula hoops and you were playing, you were kind of organizing this activity and you were in different groups. Okay, and I said, okay guys, let's go ahead and let's take 3 hula hoops and place them on the ground. So what would you do? You would put 3 hula hoops on the ground. Okay, and then you turn around and I say, okay, well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and go over to that bucket of marbles over there and grab 2 marbles and I want you to place 2 marbles in the middle of each hula hoop. So you would put 2 marbles in the middle of each. Okay, so let me describe this. All right, I would then of course say, well, what's the total amount of marbles? Now you could probably count and see them right now, how many total marbles you have there, but in this case groups would mean, and you just have to use your imagination a little bit. The groups, of course, are the hula hoops. So in this case, there's 1, 2, 3 different groups. Well, the size of each group, there are 3 groups, the size of, in this case, how many marbles are in each group? Well, remember, they have, for multiplication to work, it has to be an equal amount in each group. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. There's 2 in each. Now, of course, probably your total that you were asking, or you were already seeing, you weren't even asking yourself because you could probably easily see it, there's a total of 6 marbles. Well, guys, that's what multiplication is. It's a quick way to do repetitive addition. So there are 1, 2, 3 groups of 2 marbles each. So 3 times 2 is 6. That's what multiplication represents. Okay? So on the other hand, it can come in a lot of different forms, but you can kind of put it in you can actually put it in a very similar pattern when you're reading a word problem. So here, I'll just make up a little word problem, okay? Let's say Joe, it's summer vacation, and Joe wants to go to the store. So what he does is he grabs some loose cash on his dresser, puts it in his back pocket, and walks on Monday to the store. Well, along the way, he's just walking and not paying attention and maybe seeing a few people and talking to them and saying hi. But along the way, Joe loses $4. On Tuesday, you think that Joe would learn his lesson, but he doesn't. So on Tuesday, he gets up, he's going to go to the store again and try it all over again. He grabs some loose change, okay, loose money, could be dollar bills, puts it in his back pocket, walks off to the store again on Tuesday. He happens to lose $4 on Tuesday. So if I ask you, of course, what's the total amount of money he lost, you would probably already know. Okay? You say, oh, Mr. Wilkins, he lost $8. I said, okay, perfect. Okay, well, let me show you this in this sort of pattern here. Okay? On the first day, day 1, which is Monday, he lost $4. Now remember, with integers, a loss, we talked about it last week. We did page 195, all right, when we were just talking about integers in general. A loss is shown by a negative, so we would say -4. That's Monday. Now on the next calendar day, right, we're talking Tuesday, he lost another $4. Now, in this story, the groups aren't hula hoops. They're actually calendar days. There's 2 calendar days. So we're breaking up the -4 into 2 different days, or 2 groups. Okay? The size of each group is obviously right in there. It's the loss of $4. The loss meaning -4. Now, more than likely, you already knew he lost $8. Now, when it comes to the total, it's -8. So what we have is we have 2 and a -4 and a -8. That is multiplication, ladies and gentlemen. 2 different groups of -4, a loss of 4. It gives us a total of -8. All right, so here's what we're going to do in this whole lesson. Is you might be asking yourself, well, that makes sense in a word problem, but if we have a positive 2 and a -4 here, it's given us a negative. How do we know when we have a negative, or how do we know when we have a positive? Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about in our lesson today. So with that said, all right, go ahead and if you haven't already done it, grab your book. Our homework starts on page 239, but please go ahead and flip to 236, page 236. Page 236 of your book. On page 236, here's what I'd like to do. Let's take a look at the very first problem, problem number 3. The first problem we're going to do, obviously, it's the third problem in your book page. Okay, problem number 3 looks like this. We have -1 times -3 times -4. Okay, we know it's multiplication because they're separated by parentheses and they're all next to each other, so it's multiplication. Now I do notice it's all multiplication, so I'm just going to follow order of operations. Since it's all multiplication, I'm just going to multiply left to right. All right, so meaning that I'm going to multiply these two first. All right, now here's what we're going to do. Step one is we are going to actually ignore the signs. Okay, and all we're going to do is multiply just the numbers, and that's what I'll write down here. But of course, saying it the 7th grade way, what we're really doing is we're multiplying the absolute value of -1 and the absolute value of -3. So in the end, all we're doing is we're ignoring the numbers and saying 1 times 3 is 3. So like a regular multiplication problem. Okay, now step 2 comes about. Step 2 is, let's write these down for notes. Okay, let's start with, what if they're different signs, meaning one's a positive and one's a negative? What if one's a positive and one's a negative? Well, tell you what, last time we did this problem, that's this type of problem right here. What was the end result? It was a negative. So anytime they're different signs, it's going to give us a negative answer. Now here's the thing. Those are both negative. They're not different. They're actually the same. So this is going to have the same signs. Now listen, if you forget this, think about it this way. You've been doing multiplication with the same signs since 3rd and 4th grade, right? You have a +2 times a +6. You get +12. Okay, you just never had to worry about negatives before. So if you have the same signs, for example, they're both positive, your answer is positive. So in this case, you have a negative times a negative. Well, those are the same signs. Our answer is a +3. And those are the basic steps. So now, of course, like I've been teaching you, don't forget, rewrite the problem. All right, if you want to do like we did last week and call that step star, make sure you rewrite the problem. Okay, so what we have now is we have 3 times -4. So we're just following the same steps. I'm ignoring the signs. 3 times 4 is 12. And in this case, positive and a negative, they're different signs. So our answer is a -12. And that is our product, -12. Okay, so with that said, here's what I'd like you to do. Flip over to page 239 of your book, which is your homework, and try out problem 21. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Go. All right, 30 seconds. Go ahead and turn to your neighbor. Please show them your work. Make sure that they rewrote their problem, and then, of course, share your answer. 30 seconds. Go. Okay, so number 21 in your book was -9 times -1 times -5. I know -9 is not in parentheses, but it's right next to it, so it still means it's multiplication. All right, so here we go. You're just gonna see me do the same steps. So I'm gonna start with -9 times -1. 9 times 1 is 9. They're the same sign, so it's a +9. Bring down and rewrite my -5. And 9 times -5, well, 9 times 5, I'm ignoring my signs, is 45. They're different signs. So It's negative 45. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to actually, I'm going to go ahead and do on page 236, problem number 2. Okay, so this one's a little different. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and go over here. I'll box this part off here for us. Okay, problem number 2. Okay, this is an actual exponent. So it's negative 3 in parentheses to the third power, or negative 3 cubed. Okay, so there's actually one step right at the very beginning that makes this problem different, and then that's it. So here's what it is. We'll just call this step 1. I'll put a little star here because it's the only difference between this problem and these type of problems. Okay, here's what step 1 is. This being an exponent, okay, the 3, remember, means repeated multiplication. So it means what's in front of it, which is negative 3 in parentheses. It's all of this. There's, I should say, 3 of those multiplied together. So what we're going to do is we're going to write it in what's called expanded form. So I'm going to go ahead and put negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. So 3 of them, just like the exponent tells us. And that's the only difference, guys. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and just follow my basic 2 steps that were in the problem above. So here we go. Ignore the signs. 3 times 3 is 9. I have same sign, so it's positive. I rewrite my problem. And 9 times 3, ignoring the signs, is 27. And they're different, so my answer is negative. Negative 27. Okay? So just taking this problem, writing it in expanded form is the only difference, and then everything else is the same. So I want you to go ahead, flip back to your homework, to page 39, 30 seconds, try out problem 19. Okay, go. Okay, 30 seconds. Turn to your neighbor. Share, of course, I want you to share what would be your expanded form and then the work, of course, with your answer. So 30 seconds. Go. All right, so on page 239, problem 19, looks a little like this. Negative 4 cubed. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead, write down. Go ahead and separate this here. I'm going to write down this problem in expanded form. So we have negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. I go ahead and take a look at the first two, going left to right. I ignore the signs. 4 times 4 is 16. They're both negative, so our answer is positive. Okay, I bring down my negative 4. I rewrite my problem. Ignore the signs. 16 times 4. Now, some of us might be able to do that in our heads. Others of us, it's a scratch paper problem, meaning you just find a blank spot in on your paper. 24 and write and solve it. So 4 times, and then 4 times 1 is 4 plus 2 is 64. Okay, and then we have different signs, right? So our answer is a negative 64. All right, so that's number 19. Okay, so here is the next type of problem I want to do. Let's go ahead and staying on page 239, I want to go ahead and try out problem 31. All right, so on page 239, 31, it's one we did last week, a couple of different, during a couple different assignments. I'm going to go ahead, and it starts with negative CD squared. Okay, so negative CD squared, remember how we do this, and it's just, this is all, should all be reviewed. Step one, okay, step one is, remember we rewrite this with parentheses where the variable is, where the letter is. So instead of negative CD squared, it's negative parentheses squared. And then of course step two can just be right with step one. I'm going to plug the numbers in here. So step one, I have the parentheses down. Step two, C is, it says in the direction, C is equal to 3. And D is 9. So now, remember step 3 is we're just going to do our order of operations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Kind of squeezing them in there, but please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So here we go. There's nothing to do inside the parentheses, but there is an exponent. I'm going to worry about that first. So 9 squared is 9 times 9, which ends up being 81. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite my problem. Now, here's the thing I'm going to do on this. There's a little note, we'll call it step star again. What you're going to see this year is sometimes you're going to see a negative right outside parentheses. Here's what I'm going to have you do a majority of those times. I'm going to have you squeeze a 1 in there. Now, maybe not be necessary on this. It might be, it may not be, but it does help us see what the actual problem is. It's negative 1 times 3 times 81. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead, negative 1 times 3. I'm going to ignore the sign. Oops, I guess it would help if I moved it up for you. Sorry about that. So we had 9 times 9 is 81. Brought down the 3. This is what I was talking about. I squeezed a 1 between the negative and the 3. I now multiply. 1 times 3 is 3. They're different signs. So I'm going to go ahead and put a negative there. Okay, and I'm going to bring down my 81. Now, 81 is not in parentheses, but I don't want it to look like negative 381. So I can either put parentheses around one of them, or I could just put a multiplication dot there. And at this point, 81 times 3, again, like scratch paper here, 3 and 24. So it's 243, and that's a negative and a positive. They're different, so it's negative 243. All right, here's the one I want you guys to try. I want you to try out 2 problems before that. Problem number 29. 29. I'll give you guys 1 minute for this one. It takes a little bit longer. 1 minute. Go. Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do. In 30 seconds, I want you to look at your neighbor's work, look and compare your work, meaning what comes after this, and then of course compare your answers. 30 seconds, go. Okay, here we go. ABC cubed. So, parentheses, parentheses, parentheses cubed. I'm going to plug in the A here in the very first one. So the A, according to the directions, is -6. The B is -4. And the C from earlier is 3. So if I'm looking here, I have a bunch of multiplication, but don't forget, we have the exponent first. So I'm going to expand this first. So it's 3 times 3 times 3. Well, that's all positive. So 9 times 3 is 27. I'm going to rewrite all this. So we have -6 times -4 times 27. Okay? And if I want to, I could put it in parentheses. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to work left to right since I've already gotten all of my, I got my exponent out of the way. So 6 times 4 is 24. They're both the same. They're both negative, so it's a positive 24. I'm going to bring down 27. Now, we have it's a double-digit multiplication problem. It might have been a while since we've done one of these. I'm going to move it up to the top here where I have some room. 27 times 24. So here we go. I'm going to start with the ones place. So 4 times 7 is 28. 4 times 2 is 8 plus 2 is 10. Now, since I'm moving over to the 10 spot, and I'm really multiplying by 20 and not 2, I'm putting 1 0 down. So since I'm moving over 1, I put 1 0 down. So 2 times 7 is 14. Carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. When I add them up, I get 8, 4, 6. And my answer is 648. Positive, that is. Okay. Now, here's what we're going to do. We do have 2 other problems to do. We're going to start with problem 230 on page 236, problem number 4. Problem number 4 on 236. It is a word problem. So, there it is. Okay. Here we go. Financial literacy. Now, I know that some of these you might not understand, so just stick with me here. It says Tamara owns 100 shares of a certain stock. There's like stocks and bonds. Okay, so she owns 100 share of these things, we could say, even if you don't know what stock is. Suppose the price of the stock, notice how it just says the stock, right, 1, drops by $3 per share. Sorry, so the stock, the share, she has 100 shares, it's per share. That's where it really matters, that it's just single, 1. Run a multiplication expression to find the change in Tamara's investment. All right, so surprise the price of the stock, so it's meaning all the stock, drops by $3 per share. For 1 share, it's $3. Now, here's what we're going to do. Okay, in your mind, all right, you should see this, and I'll consider this step 1. This is mental math. Okay, in your mind, here's what you should see. Here's one piece of stock. And you're like, Mr. Wilkins, that's a circle. Well, I understand. Even if you don't know what stock is, we know, a share of stock. Even if we don't know what a share of stock is, we'll just say that's one of them. That's 2 of them. There's actually 100 of these. Now, listen, I don't expect you to draw 100. Remember, that's why this is mental math on this part. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 100. That's what the ... is. We have 100 of these things. Okay, here's what matters. There's a drop of $3 per share. Well, first of all, the drop is showing a negative value, -3. So here's 1 share, right? It's -3. Here's another, -3. As a matter of fact, we will have 100 of these that look the same. Now, remember what we were talking at the beginning of the lesson. We have 3 shares, we have 100 shares at a drop of 3. We have 100 groups. 100 of these. In each one, the size, I guess you'd say, is a drop of 3 or a -3. Now, it does say write a multiplication expression to find the change. Well, that is actually what I just did. I just did step 2. There's our expression. Now, you see where it says explain your answer? Here's all they're wanting you to do on this particular problem. They want you to explain it by backing it up with work. So you have your expression. Now let's just simplify it. We drop the sign or signs. 100 times 3 is 300. In this case, it is two different ones. It's negative 300. Now, because it's a word problem, we're going to put our units on it. Now, instead of me putting a negative 300, remember, it's how much did they lose. That's what it means, a change in her investment. It's negative $300, but that negative, remember, means it dropped. So in this case, actually, considering we're talking about money, you can also put it, instead of negative $300, you could put it as it dropped, or you know what, not even dropped. Let's say she lost $300. The word lost, of course, goes for the negative. There's a loss of $300. Okay, so these are the kind of word problems that come in to what we were talking about at the beginning of the lesson. Okay. So, with that said, let's do one more together, actually. Let's take a look at page 239. Let's look at problem 22. Okay? Here we go. It's the same kind of problem, but a different situation. So, number 22, let me move this down a little bit. So, the directions say, write a multiplication expression to represent each situation, then find each product and explain its meaning. So the average person loses 50 to 80 hairs per day to make way for new growth. Okay, so 50, it's a loss. Ooh, negative 50 to 80 hairs. But you know what? That's just kind of giving us an idea of like what statistically is going on. So it goes on to be more specific. If you read on, it says, suppose you lose 65 hairs per day for 15 days without growing any. I'm already thinking, here's what I'm thinking. Drawing a little diagram always helps as well. I'm thinking 15 days. There's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Okay, 15 of these. Now, if you want to draw 15, be my guest. You don't have to. But here's what it is. Every single one of these calendar days, there's a loss of 65 hairs. So here's what it is. The groups are the calendar days. There's 15 of them. Each day, the size is negative 65 because that's showing a loss of 65 hairs. There's our expression that they want. Now they want us to, of course, find the product. So here we go. 65 times 15. All right. So 65 times 15 is, well, let's find out. Go over here, do our double-digit multiplication. 5 times 5 is 25. Carry the 2. 5 times 6 is 30 plus 2, so 32. I'm moving over 1 to the 10, so I put 1 0 down. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 6 is 6. When I add it up, I get 5, 7, and 9. So I have 975. This is a negative. Now, here's what they want us to do. Write the negative down as a word. So let's reread it. It says, suppose you lose, that's right, it was losing 65 hairs per day for 15 days. What this is a loss of 975 hairs. Hairs is our unit. Loss is, of course, what the negative means. A loss is 975 hairs. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, that's all you're going to see. It's a lot of different type of problems, but that's all you're going to see on tonight's lesson for multiplication of integers.